Hello and welcome to another episode of Hollywood Wargaming, and today we are going to have a unit review for the new IG-100 Magnaguard, who are of course the beloved separatist bodyguards of characters like General Grievous, who have been a highly anticipated unit to show up for the CIS, and we finally have them. So let's go ahead and dive right into the Magnaguard's unit card and see if they live up to our expectations. And first up here, we are going to have a 3-man Special Forces squad coming in at 72 points, which is going to translate to 24 points per model, meaning these Magnaguards are definitely not cheap. And they are going to have a healthy tower of upgrade options here, starting with heavy weapons, followed up by 2 training slots, and then also a comms upgrade, followed up at the end by grenades. But moving over to the right-hand side of the card, we are going to see that this is a droid trooper unit, which is to be expected. They are, after all, droids. And they will have 2 health per model, backed up by a red defense die and courage 2. After that, we are going to see that these Magnaguard are blessed with an offensive surge to hit, and will also have a movement speed of 2. Below that, we are going to have the Electro Staff melee profile, which will be sporting 2 black dice, followed up by their Precision Dart Laser Pistol, which is going to be range 1 to 2, and rolling 1 black and 1 white dice. So what do I think of the Magnaguard's baseline stats so far? Well, let's go ahead and make our first comparison to the Imperial Royal Guards, as they are basically this unit's Imperial counterpart. And here, you're basically downgrading 1 dice on each of your weapons profiles in order to gain that surge to hit. And while that may seem rather unappealing at first glance, if you go to tellmetheodds.net and punch in the stats here, you will see that 2 black dice with an offensive surge is going to be scoring about as many hits on average as a black and a red dice. And as we all know, offensive surges gain a lot more value when you start adding heavy weapon upgrades into a unit and increasing their overall dice pool. However, the Magnaguard's Precision Dart Pistol is going to be coming up a little bit short in that trade-off, but that's not a huge dent to this unit overall, as they are definitely going to be a melee-focused unit, but it is something that will come up again when we take a look at the heavy weapon options, so keep that in mind. But overall, I think the Magnaguard do come out on top here as far as that trade-off goes. Offensive surges are a pretty big deal, and as we will take a look at later, it is going to allow you to get more hits on average out than you otherwise would without it. But let's go ahead and move along and take a look at the keywords for the IG-100 Magnaguard, as it very much is going to inform how this unit plays. And first up here, like most other droid trooper units, we are going to have an AI keyword, this time being dodge and move, meaning you must perform one of those actions as your first action during your activation, should you not have a face-up order token on you. Now, anytime we see multiple options in the AI keyword, it is going to give you some flexibility, and having AI move on a melee-oriented unit is definitely not a major drawback, as you are going to be wanting to move for your first few turns anyways. The only time this AI is really going to start kicking you is when you're locked in melee combat and you're trying to get those aim tokens to boost your attack pools, but even then, there's definitely worse things you can do than take a dodge token. But even then, there's a lot of ways to work around the drawbacks of AI. We just saw the new override keyword show up on Kraken, a unit that's going to synergize very well with the Magnaguard and use that keyword to negate their AI if they need to. And you can even do things like coordinate, take comms upgrades, or give them a standard order the old-fashioned way, which is all going to help negate that AI on the turns where you need it the most. So once again, we are seeing AI on a droid trooper unit that isn't really holding them back too much, but it is going to require you to think a little bit more as a commander. But next up, we are going to have the charge keyword, something that is pretty much a necessity on any melee-oriented unit. Not much else to say about this keyword for the time being, but keep in mind that it is not relentless and it only works for melee attacks, as that will become relevant later on in this unit review. But after that, we are going to have Guardian 2 Commander, meaning this unit can perform Guardian actions, but only for friendly commander units. And I think this restriction to commander units only is a much bigger drawback than people may think, and I think it is going to be a scenario in which the IRG come out on top, as they only have a standard Guardian 2, with no restrictions as to what units they can Guardian. So right off the bat, these guys are not going to be bodyguarding for Darth Maul, and when you think about the future implications of this keyword, the IG-100 are going to be very restricted in what future releases they interact with. They're not going to be able to do things like Guardian for bounty hunters, who may have a victory token on them, and the Separatists, perhaps more so than any other faction in the game, is going to be one that's going to have a lot of juicy operatives, as they really like their hired guns, and they are definitely going to stand out in contrast with the rest of their droid army, so having this faction's Guardian unit being entirely incongruent with operatives is something that may actually come around and bite them in the future. Though for the time being, there is definitely some strong commander options here that you will pair with the Magnaguard. As I mentioned earlier, we just got Kraken, our melee-oriented super tactical droid, who's going to be pretty much buddy-buddy with the Magnaguard. He has a lower health count and is more vulnerable to keywords like Pierce, so having a Guardian unit nearby is definitely going to benefit, and both him and the Magnaguard are going to want to be punching your enemies, so you're not really going to have any issues with them being at odds with their location on the battlefield, as you would with something like a T-Series or Kalani. After that, we have General Grievous himself, who is going to be the cannon retinue for the Magnaguard. And while I don't think that General Grievous really has any issues with durability and already has other ways to get access to Guardian, having a squad of Magnaguard alongside him is pretty much going to guarantee that you're going to get in there and drop that one pip and slap your enemies with that awesome AoE fan attack. Having GG and a squad of Magnaguards march up the field is also just going to be an outright imposing amount of red saves. And if your opponent tries to counter it by throwing their saber wielder towards General Grievous, you can simply linebacker that hero with your IG-100s, while Grievous himself runs amok and chews through the rest of his units. However, with our current lineup of commanders, I think Count Dooku is going to be the one who will most benefit from having a Guardian unit of IG-100s nearby, as Dooku absolutely is a powerhouse of a character, but with just 6 wounds behind a red defense dice, with no defensive surge, your opponent is going to dump a lot of firepower into him and do everything they can to get him off the table as quick as possible. And really, all you need to do is get a little bit unlucky with some of those 4+ red saves, and you will be down a 200-point commander. So even if you're just paying 72 points for a naked squad of Magnaguards, I think it is going to go a long way for Count Dooku. You could even use the same strategy I recommended for Grievous and have the IG-100s linebacker their saber units, and perhaps have Dooku jump in there at the very end and use his saber mastery to disarm their Pierce immunity and cut them down with ease and style. But overall, with this Guardian keyword, I am glad that Darth Maul exists because it does highlight the shortcomings that I was talking about with this keyword being restricted to commanders. And I think it does demonstrate to us that the Magnaguards are much more of a side grade to the Imperial Royal Guards than an outright upgrade. But next up here, we are going to have the Immune Pierce keyword that is restricted to melee only, a keyword that the Imperial Royal Guard have to pay for with their heavy weapon upgrade, which is very nice to see show up on the Magnaguard's base unit card, as it means you can run this squad completely naked in that Guardian role and still be able to linebacker against units like Jedi. After that, we are going to have the Retinue keyword, which will, much like their Guardian, apply to any unit with the commander ranking. And this will allow you, if you are within range 1 to 2 of a friendly commander, to gain 1 aim or dodge token at the beginning of the activation phase. So while the IRG have Entourage with Palpatine, which is on his unit card, the Magnaguards are instead going to retrofit onto any commander unit with this Retinue keyword, and this will make them a little bit more usable regardless of which list you're running. And going back to that AI keyword, if you do find yourself locked in a melee and you're forced to take that AI dodge action, you can always use Retinue to give yourself an aim token. So once again, I want to iterate that the drawbacks of AI are very easily circumvented here. And while Retinue may not be as powerful as something like Entourage or Teamwork, I do find it to be a keyword that is a lot more easy to plan around, as you are going to have those tokens up front at the beginning of your turn, regardless of your activation order. But lastly here, we are going to have the Unhindered keyword, an added bonus that is going to allow you to ignore difficult terrain. And while this isn't quite as nice as something like Expert Climber or Scale, it's definitely going to help you out on the charge, which makes it a nice added keyword, regardless of how often it comes up. But that is going to wrap up all the keywords for the IG-100 Magnaguard and also their unit card in whole. So how do I feel about them now? Well, like I said earlier, they are a pretty interesting retrofit into the CIS faction, and while things like Retinue instead of Entourage might seem a little bit more flexible than their Imperial Guard counterpart, the restriction on their Guardian keyword is going to pigeonhole them a bit, and that may actually prove to be quite the hindrance as time goes by and the meta shifts. But overall, I do see a few solid uses in which you can implement these Magnaguard into a CIS list. But the real standout here is going to be running these guys alongside Kraken or Count Dooku, and while they are a very good melee unit in their own right, I don't think that's really going to come into play until we see a dedicated full squad transport for the Separatist faction, which honestly we may be seeing very soon with the release of the Persuader class tank that is on the horizon. However, I do think that is going to be limited to core trooper options, and maybe even just B1 battle droids. But if the Persuader class turns out to be a universal transport capable of carrying Magnaguards, I could definitely see these guys being run as the droid Wookiee warrior equivalent. But with the unit card wrapped up, let's go ahead and take a look at the upgrades for the IG-100 Magnaguard. And first up here, we are going to have their unique heavy weapon selections. And if you watched my previous video when these cards were revealed, you might know how I feel about them, and my thoughts haven't changed too much. but this is a comprehensive unit video, so I will go over them again. And first up here, we are going to have the Electro Whip. And this weapon is going to be a 28-point upgrade that is going to have range melee to 1 and throw 2 red dice, while sporting the Versatile and Immobilize 1 keyword. So right off the bat, this is a very unique heavy weapon, one that can actually engage in melee or lash out at an enemy unit at range 1 and strike them with the Versatile keyword, allowing you to potentially immobilize an enemy unit while tying up another one in melee combat with the rest of your squad. However, do keep in mind that Immobilize 1 needs to wound your enemy in order for them to get that Immobilize token. So if you are splitting up your attack pool and having this whip strike out at a target that the rest of your squad is not engaged in, they have a decent chance of blocking these incoming attacks with things like cover, dodge tokens, or red armor saves. So for the most part, I would consider bundling this in with the rest of your attack pool, as you are much more likely to get that wound through and inflict that Immobilize token. And that's really not too bad of an option anyways, as that will prevent your enemy from being able to withdraw from combat, as that Immobilize token will no longer allow them to make that speed 1 move. So overall, I do find the keywords on this weapon to be a bit gimmicky, but at the end of the day, you are only paying 4 extra points for another 2 wounds, and upping your standard 2 black dice on the Magnaguard to 2 red dice, and that's really going to increase the average amount of hits you score on your opponents, which in my opinion makes it worth taking in its own right, all gimmicks aside. But next up here, we are going to have our second heavy weapon, that is going to be the RPS-6 rocket launcher, and this is the same rocket launcher that the Phase 1 clone troopers have access to. However, these giant robots are going to lose the cumbersome keyword on it and instead gain critical 1, on top of the standard Impact 2, which backs up a single rainbow of red, white, and black dice at ranges 2 to 4. And this is going to be a 28-point weapon upgrade, just like the Electro Whip, and it certainly is going to be one of the better rocket launcher profiles that we've seen in this game. Critical 1 and Impact 2 behind 3 dice means there is a chance that this weapon alone can force 3 saves on an armored vehicle, and if you pair that with another 3 black and 3 white dice from these standard precision dart lasers that the Magnaguards carry, you're looking at a pretty strong anti-armor attack pool, though this will require you to be at range 2, as the rocket launcher itself cannot fire at range 1 and the pistols cannot shoot beyond range 2. Here's the problem with the RPS-6 on the Magnaguard though. This is a very melee skewed unit, or at the very least, close range skewed unit, and the RPS-6 is very much at odds with that. And I know what you guys are thinking. Hollywood, you said the exact same thing about the B2 Haas, and now they're stomping the competition. And you're not wrong about that. I definitely underplayed the B2 Haas, though I will say that video did come out before the T-Series tactical droid was a thing. And now I do see a lot of players out there comparing the RPS-6 Magnaguard to the B2 Ha as a viable range combat unit, especially with the growing presence of vehicles in the meta. Here's why I don't think that will be a thing though. I don't really think people are taking the B2 Haas because of their impact capabilities. I think people are taking the B2 Haas because of the blast keyword more so than anything else, as having a standard core trooper unit that can straight up ignore your enemy's cover is extremely powerful, and the impact just seems like a little bit of an added bonus that has become more relevant with the release of that AA5. So personally, I don't feel like we're going to see a lot of players out there paying 100 plus points in that premium special forces slot to run a melee focused unit wielding a rocket launcher. Now, I could be wrong about this, and there may be some big demand for a jack-of-all-trades unit, one that can sit in the backfield with someone like, say, Kalani, and counter either enemy vehicles or enemy Jedi who come crashing into your ranks. And to be fair, that may be very powerful against an AA5 full of Wookiees smashing into your droid gun line, but that entire strategy is going to rely on your opponent and what he brings to the table and how he uses them. And overall, that reactive playstyle doesn't really seem to work out too well in Legion, and I think committing your special forces to a highly specialized role is going to do much better for you in terms of points investment. And because of that, I'm definitely leaning heavy towards the Electro Whip over the RPS, though admittedly, I have been wrong about this kind of thing before. But lastly, we are going to have a third heavy weapon upgrade here, and this one is pretty interesting because it's usually something that goes in the personnel slot, but as we all know, special forces do not have personnel, otherwise the game would instantly break. And here, at 22 points, you are simply getting a fourth Magnaguard to put into this unit. And this one here, in my opinion, is pretty much pointless. I would much rather spend the extra 6 points and get the upgraded red dice that the Electro Whip offers. And if your goal in running Magnaguard is to simply get more wounds to Guardian with, you're better off saving the 22 points and putting it towards a whole nother unit of Magnaguard and running 2 3-man squads instead of 1 4-man squad. A lot of highly competitive players will tell you that personnel upgrades are a waste of points and better spent on fleshing out your activations. And while personally I do like adding personnel into a squad to give it more wounds to protect their heavy weapons, there's really no point in doing that here with the Magnaguard, as the personnel himself is replacing the heavy weapon option, and he's doing so at a very minuscule discount. If we're going to put personnel like this in a heavy weapon option, they're really going to need a steep discount to be worth it. So overall, with these 3 heavy weapons, I think the Electro Whip is going to be the one that people take 9 out of 10 times. I'm sure some players are going to fiddle around with the RPS and maybe put it to good use, but again, I definitely don't think it's the next B2Ha, and I would much rather spend the amount of points you're going to put into an IG-100 RPS squad on that tried and true core trooper unit. But with those heavy weapons wrapped up, we are now going to move along to the training upgrade slots, of which the IG-100s have 2. And as we all know by now, melee units absolutely love taking training upgrades, so having 2 of them is always a great sign, especially on droid troopers who usually don't get access to training. But in this lineup, we are going to be seeing the usual suspects here, with one additional new card that is tailor-made for units like the Magnaguard. And first up, we will see Offensive Push, all reliable, that is going to give you an aim token when you move when this card is exhausted. Extremely useful on melee units during the turn where they charge into combat with 2 movement actions. And when you're throwing 6 black dice, having 2 aim tokens is really going to optimize your potential damage output, and that makes Offensive Push a very strong contender for one of these 2 training slots, especially if you are going to be running this unit very aggressively. Though keep in mind, you can also generate aim tokens here through Retinue, so I don't think Offensive Push is quite as a must-take on the Magnaguards as it would be on most other melee units. But hey, you are rolling a lot of black dice, and aim tokens are always going to help you out in that scenario. But after Offensive Push, I am going to recommend the new Protector upgrade card, one that is going to allow you to block critical hits with Guardian. And while this card is exhaustible, it's somewhat irrelevant for the Magnaguard, as it does auto-recover at the end of the turn, and considering that you can only Guardian on commanders anyways, it's unlikely that you're going to need to tap this twice in a single turn. So if you are bringing the IG-100s along as a bona fide bodyguard unit, this may be a very valuable upgrade to take. But at 5 points, I do have a bit of a problem with this card. If your opponent's not rolling hot dice, you're not going to feel like these 5 points are justified. And from my experience when I'm running Guardian builds, my opponent tends to focus fire on the Guardian unit themselves and chew through them before even bothering sinking fire into the unit that they are there to protect. And not only would that nullify the benefits of paying 5 points for this upgrade, but your opponent seeing this upgrade may only further entice them to take that route rather than target your commander themselves. That being said, at the end of the day, you are still drawing fire away from your hero, so perhaps it will be worth it. But if they were already going to do that anyways, there isn't much of a point to paying 5 points for Protector. And because of that, I personally think this card is a bit overcosted. I will try running it, and I could see it being useful in Emperor Palpatine list, where you absolutely need to keep all wounds on him no matter what. But for the time being on Magnaguards, it is a little bit of a weaker recommendation on my behalf. But let me know what you guys think about this card in the comments down below. But lastly, we are going to have Tenacity, a card that when wounded will allow you to gain an extra red die for your melee attack pool, which needless to say is very good. Red dice are the best offensive dice in the game, but it's really going to help out in terms of attrition. When your battles start to drag on and your units start to lose models, they will start throwing less and less dice each time they attack, but Tenacity will ensure that they're throwing at least one solid hit every time they swing. Combine that with the multi-wound hardiness of the Magnaguard, and this card is going to help you keep up your average amount of hits each time you attack, even when you start removing those black dice from your attack pool. And personally, in my opinion, this card is going to be one of the mainstay upgrades here in these 2 training slots, with Offensive Push being a strong runner-up. And only in those scenarios where you really need to keep your commanders alive and expect a lot of incoming fire would I swap Offensive Push for Protector. But for the most part, I am going to be sticking with the best defense is a good offense train of thought, as you really are going to want these Magnaguard smashing into your enemies and not just standing there taking Guardian rolls, as that really is a job more cut out for something like B1s, who don't have a large points overhead that they need to work off. But before we move on to our next upgrade slot, I want to quickly touch on a new upgrade card, Into the Fray, a training upgrade that is going to give you 1 surge each time an enemy within range 1 activates, a card that is ideal on melee and assault units, and could potentially be used to up the durability of Magnaguards when defending. However, I don't like relying on your opponent's activations to get tokens. Again, it simply just puts the ball in their court, and in my opinion, it just isn't worth it, and I would rather put those 4 points towards something like aggressive tactics, which you will have more direct control over. But with those final thoughts on the training upgrade slots, we are going to move along to our comms. And our first option here should be no surprise to any of you at this point. It is going to be the Comms Jammer, which at 5 points will prevent enemy units at range 1 from receiving face-up order tokens unless they are issued it by themselves. And I think this upgrade gets extra utility on the IG-100 Magnaguards, as they are a unit that is going to be running into the battle many times alongside a friendly unit, who more often than not will likely be a commander. And simply put, that's going to draw a whole lot of attention from your enemy's army. And having your opponent not be able to issue orders to units within range 1 of those assailants is only going to make it even that much harder for him to deal with the situation at hand. And personally, I do think this is the standout upgrade to take here. But I do have 2 other recommendations if you are trying to prioritize getting face-up order tokens on your Magnaguard, and the first of which is going to be the new Hacked Comms upgrade card, a 5-point upgrade that is going to allow you to issue yourself an order and get that face-up token if an enemy unit within range 1 is issued an order. And honestly, overall, I don't think this card is too fantastic. I find it to be incredibly niche, and I don't think it's going to work out on most units, even melee units. However, with the Magnaguards, I think there is going to be a big exception to that, and this primarily is going to be due, again, to the nature of them being run alongside commanders, units who, once they reach melee, tend to like to play their 1-pip card that only affects themselves, and also tend to be very high priority targets for your opponents. So should a character like Grievous smash into an enemy lines with a Magnaguard unit alongside them, there is a strong chance he will be playing his 1-pip card that only activates himself, and there is also a very good chance that all nearby enemies are going to try and terminate him with Extreme Prejudice. Meanwhile, your IG-100 unit, who has been left in the dust during the order phase, is going to watch all nearby enemy units light up with face-up order tokens as they try and execute that leader, which will then, of course, trip Hacked Comms unit and give your IG-100s that face-up order token, ensuring that they are going to follow up their commander immediately after he makes his big move. So again, we are going to have an upgrade card that's going to get a lot more utility on the Magnaguards than it otherwise would, thanks to their synergy with commanders and that dedicated bodyguard role. But let's go ahead and say you are trying to prioritize getting face-up order tokens on these Magnaguards, and you're willing to pay a premium to do so a little bit more reliably. Well, boy do I have the card for you. It is called HQ Uplink, and it has been around for quite some time now. And while I don't think this is going to be a mainstay on the Magnaguard, I do find it to be a pretty viable option, especially if an IG-100 squad is going to be your only Special Forces token in your order pool, as it's always nice to rip that one random token out of your activation order. And if you do pair this upgrade with other exhaustible cards, such as say Offensive Push, making recovery actions becomes all the more valuable. But even if you don't reset these cards, if you do play them on the turn where they matter the most, perhaps turn 3 or 4, where your forces really start to clash, it may prove critical for the outcome of the match. But if you guys are familiar with my content and how I feel about Star Wars Legion, you know I'm going to say this. If you are super strapped for points, I wouldn't hold it against you if you ran the IG-100s without any comms upgrades at all. That being said, I do think they are a very good candidate for Comms Jammer, more so than most other units in the game. But if I had to shake 5 points off this unit, that is probably where I would start. But lastly, we are going to move along to our final upgrade category, which of course is everyone's favorite, grenades. And if I'm being quite honest with you guys, I am tempted to skip this almost every time I make these videos. Grenades, in theory, add a lot of flexibility to how a unit performs. But in most war games, and Star Wars Legion is definitely not the exception, it is usually better to invest in a very specific, specialized combat role, rather than spending points on jack-of-all-trade upgrades. And grenades are a prime example of this pitfall, even on a unit that is going to often be within range 1 of an enemy. In most scenarios, you are going to be paying for an upgrade that simply does not perform as well as your standard attack actions with your unit's specialized role. But if you are a Separatist player and you are hellbent on making use of grenades, or perhaps just trying them out, the IG-100s are definitely a very solid platform to equip them onto. Not only is this a unit who already wants to get up close and personal with your enemies, but they also have the durability to do so and survive without having to get into melee combat to cover their skins. So if you absolutely have to, here is the grenade upgrades I would recommend. And first up is going to be the concussion grenade that gives you the blast keyword, and this is very much a scenario in which one model is going to throw this grenade while the others use their precision dart pistols. Again, simply to add that blast keyword into your attack pool and make sure your hits aren't being negated by cover. But after that, we are going to have the Impact Grenade, which will sport 1 black die, and the Impact 1 keyword, which is going to stack for each model that makes use of this weapon's profile when attacking, meaning if you have a 3-man squad of Magnaguards and all 3 of them choose to throw this grenade, you will have a 3 black dice attack pool with Impact 3, which will be quite potent when targeting nearby enemy armored units. And things get only more interesting when you consider the Electro Whip has range 1 attack, which can synergize quite well with grenades, giving you 2 red and 3 black dice with Impact 3, which is a pretty impressive anti-armor attack. And personally, I would rather run this build to punish encroaching armored vehicles than the RPS, but at just range 1, it's definitely going to be more of a failsafe than a hard counter. And sure, I guess some people can make an argument for the smoke grenade also, but for the most part, like I say with almost every other unit in Star Wars Legion, skip over the grenades. These points are pretty much always best spent elsewhere, and my recommendations here are pretty much just an obligatory niche suggestion. But it is going to put a cap on all of our upgrade options here, and move us along to the portion of the video where I show you what grenades we're not going to equip. No, I'm just kidding. It is the part of the video where I recommend what I would equip on the IG-100s in various builds for different battlefield roles. And first up here, we are going to have our recommended melee build, one that I think is going to be the primary mainstay build. And here, we are of course going to be running that Electro Whip heavy weapon upgrade. You will be upping your overall health by 25% and adding 2 red dice to your attack pool, along with some very interesting keywords. And we are going to further buff up this unit's melee prowess by adding the Tenacity and Offensive Push training upgrades, which will of course get you even more red dice and also a good healthy amount of aim tokens when you have that Alpha Strike move, and that's really going to promote this unit from being just a bodyguard squad all the way up to a very lethal melee unit, one that will be able to go toe-to-toe with saber-wielding heroes. However, if you are running someone like Dooku or Kraken who really needs some more bodyguard protection to keep them alive, you could consider swapping out Offensive Push for Protector, but again, I do have my doubts about that card's utility. But lastly, in this melee build, we are going to have the Comms Jammer upgrade, and for all the reasons I mentioned earlier, this is very useful to have on a unit that is going to be up close and personal with your foes. Though if you do find yourself needing to drop this unit from 113 points down to 108 points, you could always ditch the 5 points Comms Jammer. There are a lot more important upgrades in your list, such as Force Powers or Aggressive Tactics, so don't let these 5 points hold you back from investing in those, should you need to. However, I'm not going to finish this video without giving you guys an RPS rocket launcher build. I know I kind of poo-pooed it earlier, but it definitely is a weapon option here, and I will give you a few recommendations based around it. And first up, in this rocket build, we are obviously going to have the RPS itself, followed up by the Hunter training upgrade. Now, in theory, if you are bringing a high-impact weapon, you are likely going to be targeting things like AA-5s or AATs, or even something as simple as an ATRT, and those spongier units are likely going to be compiling wounds onto them, which will trigger Hunter and get you some aim tokens. And if we are going for a range skew here, throwing those black and white dice that our range 1 to 2 blasters have, aim tokens are definitely going to be in higher demand than they already were. So if you're running Hunter and Offensive Push alongside that retinue keyword, you are going to have a pretty strong source of aim tokens, and you will be a serious threat against incoming armor units. So obviously Offensive Push is going to be the next upgrade in this build, and here you really are taking advantage of the lack of cumbersome on that rocket launcher, and trigger Tactical 1 on a turn where you would move to make sure the rest of your blasters that are range 2 are contributing to that attack pool. So while Tactical 1 may seem a little bit redundant at first glance on a weapon with range 2 to 4, I think it will come up more often than you may initially think. However, moving on to comms, we are going to see that this offensive push is going to be paired with HQ uplink, and as I mentioned earlier in this video, HQ uplink is going to give you full control over when you activate this unit, and ensures that you can activate and fire this unit when you need to the most. On top of that, you are going to be pairing this exhaustible card with offensive push, which will make your recovery actions more valuable, and on a unit that will very selectively be choosing its targets, I think you will find the time to make recovery actions and make the best use of these upgrades throughout the course of a match. But lastly here, we are going to have concussion grenades, an upgrade that is going to allow you to sacrifice one white die for the blast keyword when you're within range 1. And on this build here, this is going to be a bit of a failsafe upgrade in case an enemy unit gets too close and you can no longer target them with that RPS rocket launcher, as it does have a minimum 2 range. However, with this rocket launcher build coming in at 123 points, I would not blame you if you chose to drop the grenades and decrease it to 120 points, or perhaps even swap it out for something like impact or smoke grenades, which will grant you different perks in different niche situations. But overall, this rocket launcher build is going to be a lot more casual, though I could see it being quite the menace to any armored units. But if the RPS ever does see competitive play, I think it's going to be in a bit of an oddball unit, a bit like the B2HA tactical droids, and I think they would benefit by skewing a bit into melee along with the rocket launcher profile. But for the final time, I am going to iterate that I'm definitely leaning more towards the melee build, but that is going to transfer us over to the part of the video where I give my opinions on the Magnaguard as a unit in Star Wars Legion, and assign them a ranking based on my interpretation and opinion of their rules. And right off the bat, I want to say that while I do think this is a good unit, I don't think they're going to see a whole lot of time on the tabletop. And to further elaborate on this, I am going to compare them once more to the Imperial Royal Guard, who have a very special place when it comes to building Imperial lists. As we all know, the Emperor Palpatine Commander unit has a very powerful 1-pip card, which more or less allows him to trade wounds for attacks, and that means whenever Palpatine takes damage, he essentially depreciates in value, and that aspect alone makes Imperial Royal Guards pretty valuable when it comes to building those types of lists, something that is just a bit lacking when it comes to the Magnaguard. Yes, they retrofit pretty well onto any commander, and I think characters like Dooku or Kraken are going to benefit from having them alongside them. However, with the Separatist, I think those points you put into the Magnaguard can go a long ways in other categories when it comes to building lists. They're just pretty expensive for what they do, and what they do is something that I don't really think the Separatists are in dire need of, though their relevance could change over time as we get more commander units and transports that can move full-size squads. But for the time being, I am going to be giving Magnaguards a flat B. This honestly is a pretty hard unit for me to judge. There's no straightforward path like there is with IRG and Emperor Palpatine, and I'm afraid if they don't find those niche builds where they really work, they may become something that just gathers dust. But with Force users coming into the fold with Burst of Speed, we may see IRG and Magnaguards alike become more relevant and serve as a sort of linebacker unit, catching any Force heroes who would otherwise blast into your lines. But overall, I have to say I'm not super impressed with the IG-100 Magnaguards. I think they are a solid unit who will be very good in more casual games. However, in my opinion, they seem to be lacking a bit of a competitive edge. But I would like to know what you guys think in the comment section down below. And if you guys enjoyed this video, go ahead and leave a like, consider subscribing to the channel and turning on notifications, as we are going to be covering all of the content for this Kashyyyk wave. And as always, until next time, take care.